"I slept with your husband." I said it quietly because there were people in that hallway, and because I have never once had to raise my voice at Caroline Ainsley. She had just told me, pleasantly, the way she said everything, that Grant used to complain there was nothing to talk about at home, that she'd never understood how he stood it. 14 years of her own marriage and 2 divorce filings entered the same morning, and that was what she chose to say to me by the elevators. So I leaned in and I said it. Then I said one more sentence, 6 words. I'm not going to tell you what they were yet because they only work if you know what I know. Her face did something I had never seen it do. She'd spent 2 years certain that whatever I was doing with her husband was theater. She said so to people who repeated it to me, and she was right for a while. That's the part that still keeps me up. I want to take you back 16 months, to a long table under a white tent, to a 12-year-old girl wearing my necklace. It was the 14th of June, a Saturday, and Northmark Health was holding what it called Family Day at a rented lodge out past the river. Lawn games nobody played, a photographer nobody wanted, and that table, where the executives sat with their spouses so the Bracken Hill people could look at us and see something more than a spreadsheet. The deal wasn't signed. Everyone under that tent knew it wasn't signed. Everyone under that tent was auditioning. My husband was auditioning hardest. Grant had a new suit and a watch I hadn't seen him buy, and he had gotten very good that year at laughing at things I couldn't hear. Somebody down the table asked me what I did. It's the most normal question there is. I opened my mouth to answer it because I did have an answer. Grant answered for me. "Myra used to do document work," he said to all of them in the warm, generous voice. "Records, filing, that kind of thing. Now she keeps the house running for me. Somebody's got to. Document work. I built and defended evidence sets for a litigation firm in Seattle. I sat in rooms with attorneys billing $900 an hour and told them which of their exhibits would survive and which would get thrown out, and I was right. There is a certificate somewhere with my maiden name on it. It expired because I let it expire, because we moved for his job, because that was the deal. The 2 women across from me made the sound women make. Not laughing. The soft, warm one that means, "Isn't that sweet?" It landed on me like a hand on the head of a dog, and before I had finished swallowing it, Grant turned away from me. He turned toward the girl sitting 2 seats down, and his whole face changed. "Junie, tell them about the program. Go on." "Junie is 12. Junie Ainsley. She's the daughter of Caroline Ainsley, my husband's boss, and Caroline was at the head of that table with the Bracken Hill men, because she was the one they'd flown in to be impressed by. Junie went pink and started talking about an accelerated math track she'd tested into, and Grant listened with his chin in his hand. He listened the way you listen to your own child. He said, 'That's my girl,' when she finished, out loud, at a table of 19 adults, 2 of whom were writing a check. I looked at her throat. Thin gold chain, small flat bar sitting just below the hollow of her neck. 3 weeks earlier, I had found that necklace in a gray velvet box in the door pocket of my husband's car, and I had put it back very carefully, and I had let myself be happy about it for 11 days, because our anniversary was the 28th of June, and it was going to be 9 years. Count them with me. He erased what I was. The table agreed with him. He performed being somebody's father in front of the men deciding his promotion, and a child was wearing a thing I had already, privately, in my own head, worn. My name is Myra. I was 31 that summer, and I'm telling you this the way it happened to me in order, including the parts where I was wrong. If you've ever been the quiet one at a table like that, the one everybody assumes has nothing to say, stay with me. This story takes a while to turn, and it turns further than you think. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest, and tell me in the comments when you knew. A lot of people say they knew at the necklace. I didn't. Here's what I did. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up too fast. I did not look at Caroline Ainsley, who was watching me the way you watch weather. I put my hand flat on the tablecloth for a second because my hand wanted to do something else. Then I said, "That's a good program, Junie." And I meant it because none of this was hers. And then, pleasantly, to the table, "Excuse me. I want to catch the photographer before he packs up." Grant smiled at me. He was relieved. He thought I was going to go be small somewhere. The photographer's name was Wendell Pike. 60-something, jacket over a golf shirt, already coiling cable the way men that age do. The second-hand event stops being fun. I asked whether the company had hired him for prints or for everything. "Prints," he said. 20 or 30 selects, cleaned up for the newsletter. I told him I was putting together something for the family, which was true, it just wasn't the family he had in mind. And I asked if he'd send me the whole card instead. Not the selects, every frame he shot. Unedited, straight off the camera with the camera data left on. He said that's a lot of pictures. 600, 700. I said I'd rather have too many. Then I gave him an address that wasn't ours. I'd opened that box the previous winter for a reason I no longer remember and never got around to closing, and I read it out to him, letter by letter, while he wrote it on the back of a receipt. My voice was completely steady. My hand was flat against my leg where he couldn't see it, because here's the thing about a photographer. He isn't on anybody's side. He isn't in the room when the story gets agreed on. He stands at the edge with a camera and takes everything, including the parts nobody arranged. And when he hands you the raw files, there's a timestamp on every single frame. Nobody under that tent can go back and change what was true at 6:52 in the evening on the 14th of June. I went back to the table. Grant asked if everything was all right. I said everything was fine, and I let him put his hand on the back of my chair, and I sat there another hour while they toasted a deal that hadn't closed. Somebody took a group photo. I'm in it. I'm smiling. I've looked at that frame more times than I can tell you. I'm not a dramatic person, and I need you to understand that because of what people said about me afterward. I didn't want a scene. I could have had one. It was right there. It was free. And every person at that table would have handed it to me. I had one very specific reason for not taking it, and she was sitting 2 seats away eating cake off a paper plate. Whatever was happening, that girl did not know she was part of it, and the first adult to say it out loud under that tent would be the one who did that to her. It wasn't going to be me. So, I waited. The 28th of June came, 9 years. He didn't mention it. Neither did I. I made dinner, and he ate it while answering emails, and at some point I stopped waiting for him to look up. That was the night I stopped being confused. Afterward, I went out to the garage because I wanted to be somewhere he wasn't, and there was a stack of boxes along the back wall from a life I'd packed up 9 years earlier. One of them had a metal thing in it, heavy, with a hand crank and an inked roller, a Bates numbering machine. Nadine Whitlock gave it to me the week I left the firm, and Nadine did not give people gifts, and what she said when she handed it over was, "You'll be back." I looked at it. I closed the box. Then I waited some more. It took 111 days for those files to give me anything, and when they finally did, it wasn't a face I recognized. It was frame 217, late light, wide shot, the tent in the middle distance. And at the very edge, half out of the picture, a man standing beside a parked car, talking to no one, not eating, not holding a drink, looking at exactly the two people I had spent 111 days trying not to look at. He'd been there the whole time. He knew before I did. And the thing he was already sitting on, worth more than a necklace, more than a hotel room, more than a lipstick on a collar, was in a box at a bank downtown. It had a number on it. I gave myself until spring to get the key. Here's the part where I'm supposed to tell you about the lipstick. It was July. A white collar folded over the top of the hamper and a smear of dark rose along the inside edge where a collar touches a neck. I want to be honest with you about what that was and what it wasn't. I did not fall apart. I took the shirt into the kitchen and I put the collar inside a plastic bag, and I wrote the date on the bag with a marker from the drawer where we kept the takeout menus. Then I put the bag in the back of my desk drawer under a box of staples. And then I sat down and I thought about how completely worthless it was. A lipstick on a collar proves that a collar touched a mouth. It doesn't prove whose. It doesn't prove when. It doesn't prove intent. I have watched attorneys destroy a whole afternoon of somebody's certainty with 3 questions about a stain, and I've handed them the questions. I kept it anyway. I'll tell you why later. I already had the list, of course. Everybody has the list. The cologne he never used to wear, the watch, the gym at 6 in the morning from a man who once described running as a thing that happens to you, the haircuts that got more frequent and more expensive, the phrase client dinner, deployed at a rate of about 2 a week. Every wife in America knows that list. Knowing the list is not the same as knowing anything. That's the trap. The list makes you feel like an investigator when what you actually are is a person with a bad feeling and a laundry basket. So I did the thing I'm least proud of in this entire story. I asked him. He didn't flinch. That's what I keep coming back to. He came into the kitchen and I said calmly that there'd been lipstick on his collar, and I held it up. Out of the bag, I want to be clear, I wasn't insane. And he looked at it for about 1.5 seconds. That's from the promotion dinner, he said. Caroline hugged everybody at the end. Half the department was drunk, Myra. Renfrew hugged me. Do you want to check my collar for Tobias? And he laughed. That's the piece that worked. Not the explanation. The laugh. A man defending himself doesn't have room for a joke. A man defending himself gets his sentences in the wrong order. He wasn't defending himself. He was performing a man who had nothing to defend, and he had gotten very, very good at it. I said, "That's probably it." He kissed the top of my head on his way to the shower, and I stood there in the kitchen with a plastic bag in my hand, thinking about one thing. He just told me he was at the promotion dinner. I hadn't known that. I had never been told there was a promotion dinner, and I was holding something with a date on it. He'd given me a timestamp to be kind to me. Odell Pruitt worked out of a second-floor office above an insurance broker, and he was 59 years old, and the first thing he did was slide a folder across the desk with sample photographs in it. Hotel entrances, parking structures, 2 people not touching, but standing the wrong distance apart. "Most clients want the pictures," he said. I said I wanted the log. He stopped. I told him the rules I needed. Public accommodation only. No trespass. Nothing on private property. No devices of any kind. Not on a car. Not in a bag. Nothing. No contact with the subjects. No pretext calls. No talking to a doorman. Continuous numbered entries. Times recorded at observation and not reconstructed after. And a sworn declaration at the end, signed, that he'd kept it that way. Pruitt sat back. "You've done this." I said I'd done the other side of it. I'd been the person who took a file like his and found the hole in it, and there is always a hole. and the whole is almost always that somebody got excited. I also told him the thing about Washington because it mattered. In this state, you cannot record a private conversation unless everybody in it agrees. Not a phone call, not a kitchen. It doesn't matter that it's your kitchen, and it doesn't matter that it's your husband, and it doesn't matter that he's lying, which is why nothing I have is a recording. Everything I have is paper. Pruitt asked me what I was hoping he'd find. I said, "I'm not hiring you to catch him. I'm hiring you to make it survive somebody trying to throw it out." He caught him in 9 days. I'd like to tell you it was more complicated than that. It wasn't. Grant Meacham was 37 years old and had never once been investigated by anybody, and he parked in the same structure every Thursday. The report came in September. Photographs. The ones I hadn't asked for and got anyway. A hotel off the interstate on the north side. A name at the desk. 9 numbered entries across 3 weeks. Times to the minute. Caroline Ainsley, 44, my husband's boss. And here is what that folder was worth. Nothing. I mean that in the specific way. In a divorce in this state, it moves almost nothing, because Washington doesn't care who was faithful when it divides what you own. In a courtroom, it's a story about 2 adults. In a company, it's an HR matter that gets handled by people who report to one of the 2 adults. I had spent $400 and 9 days to confirm something I already knew, and I had bought myself exactly no leverage at all. I went home and made dinner. He told me a very good story about a client dinner in Coeur d'Alene, with a detail in it about a bad waiter, and I listened to my husband lie to me the way you'd watch somebody demonstrate a skill. Then I asked him how the quarter was going. That's the part of the evening I want you to notice, because it's the only part that mattered. He complained. He always complained about the same thing, and I'd been letting it wash past me for years, and that night I stopped letting it. "Quarter end's a nightmare," he said. "It's not the numbers, it's the pile. Every VP level has to sign the whole stack of certifications before the auditors will look at anything. Related party, code of conduct, all of it. 40 pages of me swearing I'm not embezzling." He laughed at his own joke. I said, "That sounds annoying," and I got up and put the plates in the sink, and I did not ask a single follow-up question. I want to be clear about how hard that was. It was the hardest thing I did that year. There were 4 things I wanted to know, and I knew that asking one of them would make him remember weeks later that I'd asked. So I asked nothing. I went upstairs and I wrote 2 words in the margin of a page, and I'm not going to tell you what they were yet either. I printed the whole card in October, 704 frames. I did it at the mailbox place, on their machine, contact sheets, 48 to a page, and it cost me $61 and took 2 hours, and I stood there the entire time. You have to understand that I wasn't looking for anything specific. That's the discipline. You do not go into a set looking for the thing you want, because you will find it, and you will find it whether or not it's there. You go in and you look at everything in order. Frame 217 was late in the evening, wide. The tent in the middle distance, everybody gold-colored in that light. And at the very edge of it, half cut off, a man standing beside a parked car. He wasn't holding anything. He wasn't leaving. He was standing at a company party in a blazer, with his hands at his sides, and his head was turned at an angle. You don't turn your head unless you are watching 2 specific people. I put my finger on him, and I brought the sheet to Pruitt, and I said, "Who's that?" Pruitt looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Her husband. He'd been there, not passing by, not arriving. He'd been at that party, at that edge, at 6:52 in the evening on the 14th of June, watching my husband and his wife, and he had walked away and gotten in that car and gone home and said nothing. I know when that photograph was taken, and I know what happened after it and what happened after it was nothing. No scene, no confrontation, no divorce filing that summer, nothing at all. There are only 3 reasons a man stands there and does nothing. He's a coward, he's building something, or he's already in it. 2 of those meant I was in far more trouble than I thought. His name was Desmond Ainsley, and he was easy to find, which is the first thing that worried me. Washington keeps business registrations open to the public. It took 11 minutes. Ainsley Ridge Holdings, LLC, a family company formed in 2014, real estate and small service contracts. 2 members listed, Caroline Ainsley, Desmond Ainsley. His name was on it. Right there, in the state's own database, on the entity that I was starting to think existed for a reason nobody had explained to me. So I built both versions. In the first version, he was me. Same room, different chair. He'd found out and he'd frozen the way people freeze, and he was standing beside that car because he didn't know what else to do with his body. In the second version, he was in it. The company was theirs. The money was theirs. He knew exactly what his wife was doing, and he had decided it was worth what it was buying. And he stood beside that car doing arithmetic. I could not eliminate either one. He was either the second victim or the 4th defendant, and I had until spring to find out which. I met him on the 16th of October at noon in a coffee place on Riverside with a full glass front, and I chose it for the glass. I want to tell you how I came into that room because it matters for later. I did not come in asking for help. I've thought about that a great deal since. If I'd walked in there as a wronged wife looking for an ally, he would have been kind to me and gotten up and left, and I would never have seen him again. I came in with a price. I put a single page on the table face up and I let him read it. It was a timeline, 9 dated entries, a hotel, a numbered log, and 1 line at the bottom noting a signature block on a state filing. He read it twice. He didn't touch it. Then he said, "Why are you showing me this?" And I said, "Because I want the key to box 1120 at First Cascadia, and you're the co-lessee and you can put anybody on it you want." He looked at me for a long moment. I hadn't planned the second part. That's not true. I had planned it, but I had planned it as something I might not say, and then I heard myself say it. There's one more thing. Whatever we do, I want them to see us doing it. Lunches, the occasional room they walk into, nothing else. Why? Because right now she thinks she has the only secret in the building. People who think that get careless. People who think somebody's comparing notes with their husband get loud. I said the last part flatly like a line in a contract, and then I said the sentence I had actually practiced. I don't need you to like me. I just need them to believe we compare notes. Desmond Ainsley pushed his coffee cup into the middle of the table. Then he stood up. He said one thing before he left, and it told me everything about the shape of his fear without telling me one single fact about its contents. You're asking me to open something that has my name inside it. Then, how do I know he didn't send you? I hadn't considered it. That's how badly I'd planned. It had genuinely never occurred to me that from where he was standing, a woman with a folder and a very specific request looked exactly like a man's wife being used to find out what he knew, and I couldn't prove otherwise. That's the thing about being honest. It looks identical to the other thing from the outside. You don't, I said, And I don't know, you won't be in her kitchen in 2 hours telling her about this." He almost smiled. It didn't get anywhere near his eyes. "What do you do?" he asked. "For work." 9 years of saying I'm at home right now, and I used to be in legal and watching the conversation move on. I said, "Records." He looked at me a second longer than he needed to. Then he left, and I sat in a glass-fronted coffee shop for 11 more minutes so that anyone watching would see a woman finish her lunch. He was gone for 9 days. I want to tell you what happened in those 9 days, because it wasn't nothing, and because I found out most of it much later from a girl who was 13 by then. Caroline texted her husband Thursday on a Tuesday and didn't come home Thursday. Then she did it again the following week, then again. 3 Thursdays. I only learned that much later, and when I did, I sat down on a stair and had to stay there a minute. At my house, Grant cleared a corner of the garage for a weight bench, and to do it, he shoved the stack of boxes along the back wall over about 3 feet, and one of them tipped and didn't get picked up. He didn't mention it. Why would he? On the 25th of October, he called me and asked if the coffee place had a back table. He brought 1 page. It was a Schedule K-1. The tax form a partnership sends you telling you what your share of it earned, his name on it, Ainsley Ridge Holdings, and a line item highlighted in yellow with a small pencil question mark beside it in the margin, in handwriting that had clearly been done more than once. Income he could not source. Not a fortune. That's what made it terrifying, and he knew it, which is why he'd sat on it for months. It was a number just large enough to be real and just small enough that raising it out loud would make him look like a man auditing his wife. I looked at it for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is all it took, and the reason it took 3 seconds is the exact reason my husband had erased my job in front of 19 people 4 months earlier. I said, "This is a distribution. Something under this entity earned money and paid it out to the members. You didn't know it existed, which means either you weren't told or you were told in a form you signed without reading." He said very quietly, "There's a general power of attorney. I gave it to her in 2019. I was in and out of the hospital for 11 weeks. And there it was. I had the story about a woman. He had the story about the money. Neither one was worth anything alone. Mine was gossip. His was a rounding error with a question mark. But a woman does not use a power of attorney to move money out of a company she already half owns. Not unless she needs the paperwork to look like something it isn't. And not unless she has a reason to keep one specific person from reading it. 2 stories. 1 reason." I said, "Then we have the same problem, and it isn't the one either of us thought." Junie Ainsley came to my house on the 22nd of November. I did not know she was coming. Grant brought her on a Saturday because Caroline was traveling and Desmond was in Boise for a property closing, and he said it in the doorway like it was a small favor he was doing for the world. She came in out of the cold and she said, "Hi, Pilot," before she said hi to me. "Our dog is 6. He came out of the back and went straight to her and put his head under her hand, and she did the thing you only do with a dog, you know, the 2 flat scratches behind the left ear, which is the one he likes. She took her coat off and hung it on the second hook, which is the one that isn't in the way of the door. Then she asked if she could get water, and she walked past me into my kitchen and went to the correct cabinet. There were 11 cabinets in that kitchen. She got a glass, and she filled it, and she turned around and leaned against the counter the way you lean when you're comfortable, and she said, "Do you guys ever open that window? It's so hot in here. It's always so hot in our house." Our house. She was 12. She had a chain around her neck with a small, flat gold bar on it. She was not being cruel, and she was not being sly, and she did not know one single thing. She'd just been coming here. I don't know for how long. I've never asked because there is no version of that answer I want. I poured myself a glass of water, too, so I'd have somewhere to put my hands. I said, "We can open it." And I opened the window over the sink in November and stood there while the cold came in and asked her about the math program. Then I heard Grant's car in the driveway. That night, I went out to the garage after he was asleep. I righted the box that had tipped over, and I opened it, and I took out the Bates machine. And I was standing there with it in both hands when the light came on behind me. He was in the doorway in a t-shirt, squinting. "You're still keeping that piece of junk?" I did not answer him. I carried it past him into the house, into the small room at the back that used to be an office and had become the place we put things, and I set it on the desk and turned on the lamp. He went back to bed. I heard him go. I sat down and I got a legal pad and I wrote 4 dates on it. I'm not going to tell you what they were. I didn't cry that night, and I want to say that without it sounding like a boast, because it isn't one. I have wondered since whether it would have been better if I had. I wrote down 4 dates, and then I sat in that chair until the window went gray. And by the time it did, I knew exactly what I was going to do for the next 9 months. On the 8th of December, my husband came home with a bottle of wine and a folder, and he put the wine down first. That's how I knew he was expecting a fight. "There's some paperwork from the transaction," he said. "It's a spousal consent, standard. Everybody at my level signs one. It just says you're aware of the equity conversion and you don't have a claim against the plan while the deal is pending." He'd rehearsed it. You can hear rehearsal. He kept going. He explained the vesting schedule to me twice in a slow, patient voice, and then he said the thing he'd been carrying up the driveway. "I know things have been off. I know that. Let me get through the close, and then we'll sit down and actually talk. All right?" I took the pen. I did not read it slowly. I want to be honest about that because it sounds like something I did for effect, and it wasn't. I already knew what it said. I'd looked up the plan documents in a public filing 3 weeks earlier and read the consent language in full twice at a kitchen table that wasn't mine. I signed it. Grant's whole body changed. He hadn't known he was holding that. "Thank you," he said. "Really." I capped the pen and slid the folder back across to him, and then I asked for the only thing I wanted. "Who's the buyer's counsel on this?" He blinked. "Why?" "Because I just signed something about equity I don't understand. And in 6 months, I'd rather ask them a question directly than have you translate it for me at 11 at night." I smiled at him. "You've got enough going on." And he laughed, relieved, a little proud of me, the way you're proud of a child who has asked a reasonable question. And he wrote it on a napkin, a name, a firm, an address downtown. He kissed my forehead on the way out the door. Then he sat in his car in our own driveway for 4 minutes and called her, and I stood at the window over the sink and watched the phone light on the side of his face. Everybody thinks evidence wins because of what's inside it. Evidence wins because of what desk it lands on. That's the whole job. That was always the whole job, and my husband had just written the address on a napkin because I asked nicely. The room at First Cascadia was in the basement, and the light in it was the flat kind that makes everybody's hands look gray. Desmond signed the deputy card upstairs and did not come down. He said, "I'll wait in the car." And I understood it, and I didn't say anything about it, because there are things you cannot watch somebody find out about your own life. They bring the box to a table, and then they leave you. There were 4 things in it. The first was a certificate of amendment for an entity called Harrow Line Services, LLC, dated the 19th of September, 2024, adding it under Ainsley Ridge. Member's signature block at the bottom, Desmond Ainsley. His name in his handwriting, or something extremely close to it. The second was the notarial certificate attached to it. Stamp, commission number, and the sentence they all have. That, on that date, the signer personally appeared before the notary. The third was the one that stopped me. It was a spousal consent form, prepared, printed, the parties typed in. Blank. She'd had it drawn up. She'd had it sitting in the box for over a year, which meant she had known, at some point, with an attorney's help, that the clean way to do this was to have her husband sign a piece of paper. And she'd looked at the clean way, and she had chosen the other one. I sat down in a basement room with fluorescent light, and my hands were completely steady, and I remember thinking very clearly she knew. Not she was careless. Not she got swept up. She knew, and she made a decision, and this blank page is the shape of the decision. Then I turned it over, and underneath it, there was a fourth thing. It was a page out of a minute book, loose, clipped at the top, the kind of insert an attorney's office generates when an LLC amends its allocation schedule. Amended schedule of membership interests. Ainsley Ridge Holdings, LLC, 3 lines. Caroline Ainsley, Desmond Ainsley, and a third line, a trust, dated April of that year, for the benefit of Junie Ainsley, 20%. The money from Harrow Line went into Ainsley Ridge, and Ainsley Ridge distributed to its members, and one of its members was a trust with a 12-year-old girl's name on it. She hadn't hidden it behind a company. She'd hidden it behind her daughter. I want you to understand what I was holding. That page turns a conflict of interest into something with a child's name inside the file. It doesn't just end a career. It makes a girl a line item in an exhibit list, and it takes the money for her school, and it follows her. Because these things are public, and because kids find them, and because somebody at a school in 10 years finds them too. It was the strongest piece of paper I have ever had in my hands. I photographed it, and then I put it back exactly where I found it, squared to the clip, under the blank consent form. I closed the box. Upstairs, the light was very bright, and it was raining a little. He was parked in a loading zone with the engine running, and when I got in, he didn't say anything for a second, and then he said, "Was there anything?" I said, 3 things. And that was the first lie I told anybody in this entire story. Except it wasn't one, because I never said it was all of them. In January, I filled out a renewal packet for a certification I'd let die in 2019. Continuing education hours, a proficiency exam, $410, and a form that asks for your legal name. For 9 years, my name had been Meacham. It took the state 4 weeks to give me the other one back. I took a contract, document review, a second-pass privilege screen for a firm in Portland, remote, unglamorous, 40 hours a week, when they had volume and nothing when they didn't. And it was deliberately, carefully, boringly unconnected to Northmark Health, to Bracken Hill, to anything in this story, because a woman who reviews documents for a living and then produces documents about her own husband gets one question in a deposition, and it's the only question that matters. I built my income in a place nobody could point at. Grant noticed something had changed in me around February. He was warmer that month. He came home earlier twice. He asked me in the kitchen whether I'd done something different, and he looked at me while he asked it. Actually looked, for the first time in a long while. He thought I was doing it for him. I let him think that. It cost me nothing, and I want to be honest. A small, ugly part of me enjoyed it. Junie turned 13 on the 7th of February. I know because she posted the pictures. Caroline wasn't in any of them. There was a diligence session that week. I knew the schedule by then better than most of the people attending it. Grant was in 4. In one of them, he's holding the cake steady while she cuts it, and his hand is on the plate, and he's laughing at something off camera. She's wearing a paper crown somebody made her. She looks 13 in a way she hadn't looked 12. That sudden year where the face changes. And around her neck, the thin gold chain with the small flat bar. I zoomed in. Not on him. I closed the laptop. We worked at his kitchen table because mine had my husband in it. 2 stacks. Mine was time. Pruitt's numbered log, hotel entries, the photograph set, the diligence calendar I was rebuilding out of 9 years of dinner table complaints. His was money. K1s going back 4 years, Ainsley Ridge bank statements, the Harrow Line contract itself, which he had finally pulled because a member of an LLC can demand its books, and she could not stop him, and the 2 stacks started fitting together in a way that made both of us quiet. Harrow Line Services had a 3-year logistics contract with Northmark Health. $2.8 million, non-clinical courier and supply routing, the kind of contract nobody reads because nobody's excited about it. It went through vendor onboarding in November of 2024, below the threshold that would have triggered a related party review because it was structured as 3 annual terms instead of 1 3-year term. The name on the onboarding approval was Tobias Renfrew. The name on the executive sign-off above it was my husband's. Desmond sat back and looked at the ceiling for a while. I said, "He didn't sleep with her to get promoted." "No," he said. "He slept with her, and then she gave him something, and then she needed him to sign something." The thing that broke it open was a book. Washington requires notaries to keep a journal. Every notarization in order, sequential entries, with the date and the type of document and the identification presented and the signature of the person who appeared. It's not optional and it's not private in the way people assume. A party to the document can request the entry. Desmond requested his own. Entry for the 19th of September, 2024. Certificate of Amendment. Identification. Washington driver's license. Signer. Desmond Ainsley, personally appeared. On the 19th of September, 2024, Desmond Ainsley was in Boise, Idaho. He had a boarding pass, a hotel folio with a check-in time of 3:14 in the afternoon, a rental car agreement, and a receipt from a restaurant on 8th Street at 7:40 that night with his card number on it, and Pruitt's log, kept for an entirely different reason months before any of this by a man who had never heard of Harrow Line Services. Put Caroline Ainsley 300 miles from both of those places on the same evening, checking into a hotel off the interstate with my husband. A signature cannot be in 3 places on a Thursday. Desmond wanted to file it that night. I understood. It had been in his chest for a year and a half, and he had just been handed the thing that took it out. I said no. He asked me why, and he didn't ask it gently, and I don't blame him. I said, if we file this now, it's a family dispute. It's a woman and her husband fighting about a company, and there's an affair in it, and every single person who reads it will decide it's about the affair. That's not a finding. That's a mess, and messes get referred to HR, and HR reports up through her. So when? There's a date, I said. Every executive at her level signs a related party certification before the auditors will touch the quarter. She signs a piece of paper that says she has no interest in any entity doing business with the company, in her own handwriting. He was very still. Right now, I said, this is a story about her marriage. 48 hours after she signs that, it's a disclosure failure inside a transaction. And the people who care about that don't work for her. They work for the buyer. I had the evidence in December. The evidence was not the problem. The evidence had never been the problem. I needed a date, and I already knew where to find it because he'd complained about it over dinner. By March, my husband had stopped pretending. He moved out on the 11th into her house, and he told people at work that his wife wasn't doing well, which is a sentence I have thought about a great deal. It isn't a lie you can catch anybody in. It's a door held open for whatever the listener wants to walk through. 2 things happened that month, and neither one of them was mine. Caroline had Verity Sloan, her chief of staff, 29, the person who managed her calendar and therefore managed what everybody else was allowed to know, run me through the internal HR system. Employment verification, background, prior claims. I am not an employee of Northmark Health. There was nothing to find and it went nowhere. It logged. Every query in that system logs. Timestamp, user credential, subject searched, purpose code. Verity entered a purpose code because the field is mandatory, and she picked one from a drop-down, and it was wrong. The second thing was that Caroline sent 2 emails about me from a company account. I didn't do anything about either one. I numbered them. I finished the diligence calendar on the 15th of March. It took 9 years of complaints to build. That's the only reason I could do it. I had been sitting across a dinner table from a man describing his quarters out loud since 2016 in the specific bored way people describe the parts of their job they hate, and I had been listening the entire time even when I'd stopped wanting to. Quarter-end certification packages go out to VP level and above 11 business days before the audit committee meets. The transaction added a second cycle. The Buyer's Council required a fresh related party certification from each executive officer inside a 30-day window before signing. The signing window opened the 3rd week of August. I circled the 17th. That gave me 155 days in which the correct thing to do was nothing at all. It was the hardest work of my life. I filed in April. His attorney was a man named Prentice who wore very good shoes and had the particular confidence of somebody who has never lost a case he agreed to take. And the first conference was 4 minutes of pleasantries and then 1 number. He put a spreadsheet on the table. 2 columns. What Grant had earned since 2016 and what I had. Mine was a column of zeros 9 years long. "We're not here to be unpleasant," Prentice said. "But there's a maintenance question, and I'd encourage your client to be realistic about it. 9 years out of the workforce is a hard thing to come back from at 32. We'd like to resolve this before it costs everybody money." Grant was sitting right there. He didn't look at me while it was being said. He looked at the window with the mild, pained expression of a man being forced to watch something regrettable that he had personally scheduled. And then, in the elevator afterward, he did look at me, and he said it in his own words, which were worse. "You haven't earned $1 in 9 years, Myra." He said it like a fact. That's the thing. He wasn't even being cruel. He'd simply looked at the 2 of us and seen a man with a career and a woman with a house, and it had never once occurred to him that the house was a job he had assigned to me. My attorney filed the income declaration 11 days later, 6 months of billing, a signed contract with a firm in Portland, ongoing with a rate schedule attached, a current professional certification with a number on it, filed under M. Coyle. Prentice called it a late development and asked for a continuance. Grant called me that night. He wanted to know when. He wanted to know how long I'd been doing it. He wanted to know why I hadn't told him, and there was something underneath the question that took me a second to identify because I hadn't heard it from him in years. He was embarrassed. Not sorry. Embarrassed. that a man had said a number out loud in a conference room on his behalf, and the number had turned out to be wrong, and he'd been sitting next to it, nodding. I said the true thing, which was that he hadn't asked. He said, "You could have mentioned it." I said I could have. Then I got off the phone and I sat on the edge of the bed for a while in a house that was very quiet, and I did not feel the way I had expected to feel. I'd expected something bright. What I got was flatter and heavier and further down, and it took me until the next morning to name it. For 9 years, the number had been a fact about me. It took 4 weeks of paperwork to turn it into a choice somebody had made, mostly him, not entirely. Sidaho. They kept going, which is the thing about people who think they're winning. In May, Caroline had Verity run me a second time. A broader query, this time flagged as pre-employment, on a woman who had never applied for a job at Northmark Health. A second entry, a second timestamp, a second purpose code selected from a drop-down by a woman who was not thinking about the drop-down. And Tobias Renfrew got a text from my husband on the 16th of May. I know what it said because Tobias produced it himself, months later when the committee asked him to. It said the reorg was coming, that Grant had put his name in for the senior role, and that he should sit tight and not talk to anybody about the Harrow onboarding because procurement always gets dragged into this stuff, and it's noise. A promotion in writing, an instruction in writing, in the same message. I want to be clear that I didn't cause that. I never spoke to Tobias Renfrew in my life. He hugged my husband at a party once and became a joke in my kitchen. They just kept writing things down. I was at Desmond's house too often that spring, and we both knew it, and we called it the files. The files were real. That was the honest part. 2 stacks on a kitchen table and a wall calendar with the 17th of August circled in pencil, and 155 days of waiting that neither of us could do alone. But I slept on that couch 4 times between February and June, and none of those times did anything happen, and I want to say that plainly because of what everybody assumed and because of what I let them assume. The 4th time, I woke up before 6 because a phone buzzed once upstairs and stopped. He came down about a minute later with his hair wrong. His alarm goes off at 5:40. He turns it off before it rings. I asked him once why he bothered setting it at all, and he said he'd been doing it for years and hadn't thought about it in about as long. I noticed, on my way out, that Junie's door at the top of the stairs was open about 2 inches. It had been shut every other time. I didn't say anything about it. I got in my car and drove home in the light, and I thought about a girl who had been coming to my kitchen for months and had never once been asked whether she wanted to. He found me in the parking structure at the courthouse in late May. He'd been waiting. That's not paranoia. He was standing by my car on level 3, and there is no reason on earth to be on level 3. "You look good," he said. I said, "Thank you." "You've lost weight. You're working. You're out." He shook his head slowly, with a small, affectionate smile, like a man solving a puzzle he was fond of. "You know what I think? I think you're doing all this because you want me to notice you." There were a lot of things I could have said. I could have told him about the boxes in the garage, about the Bates machine, about a certification I let die because we moved for his job. I could have explained the shape of the last 11 months to him in order, and he'd have listened, and he'd have found the version of it that let him keep being the center. I could have told him that the only man I was trying to be noticed by was a stranger's attorney with an office on Riverside. I said, "All right," and I got in my car. Halfway down the ramp, I looked in the mirror, and he was still standing there in the same spot, and I understood something I hadn't the second before. He was going to keep believing it. There was no evidence I could give him that would compete with it. In his version, everything I did was still about him, all the way down, and he would rather be the villain in my story than not be in it. She started coming apart in May, and it had nothing to do with me. That's what I want you to understand about that spring. I did not push her. I had spent 155 days doing nothing, and the whole time, on her side of it, a woman who had built an entire career on being the best informed person in every room was slowly finding out she wasn't. She rescheduled the same meeting twice in a day. She sent the second email. And in the third week of May, according to a man who told me about it much later with real difficulty, she stood in her own kitchen and asked her husband directly, for the first time in 14 years, whether something was happening. He told her the truth. Nothing was happening. She didn't believe him. I want to sit in that for a second, because it's the closest thing to a verdict in this entire story, and no institution handed it down. She had spent 2 years being lied to by a man who was very good at it in her own house, and she'd believed every word. And the first time somebody told her the truth, she couldn't hear it. I had said one sentence to her in a coffee shop in October and never spoken to her again. I hadn't done a single thing to make that happen. In early June, I suggested the restaurant. I said it as what it was, because by then I'd learned that saying it out loud was the only way to keep it clean. They should see us somewhere, not a coffee shop, somewhere it looks like a decision. He didn't answer right away. 3 seconds. I counted them, because I count things. And I've thought about those 3 seconds more than almost anything else in this story. Then he said, "All right, I noticed. I noted it, and I put it away the way I put away everything that year that didn't move the file forward, and I told myself I'd look at it later." The restaurant was on the 6th of June, and it went exactly the way I designed it. There was no kiss. There was never a kiss. A corner table with sight lines, a bottle of wine that neither of us drank much of, and at one point his arm along the back of my chair, which is a thing men do without meaning anything and which reads across a dining room like a headline. He said something dry about Prentice's shoes. I laughed for real, which I hadn't planned, and that's the part that carried. Grant saw us first. He was 3 tables away with a woman who had been suspended from nothing yet, and I watched him find us, and I watched him do the arithmetic. And I saw the exact instant it stopped being about who I was with, because he'd had a theory. He'd had it in a parking structure in May, and he'd been comfortable in it, that everything I'd done in the last year was a long, complicated way of asking him to look at me. And here I was, looking somewhere else, in a restaurant he'd taken me to twice. That was the night my husband understood that I hadn't improved myself to win him back. I'd walked out of a world he thought he was the center of, and I hadn't left a forwarding address. She called me 8 days later and asked me to meet her. A wine bar, 4 in the afternoon, nearly empty. She was there first, which I hadn't expected, with a glass in front of her she hadn't touched. She didn't do small talk. I'll give her that. "What exactly are you doing with my husband?" I said. "You didn't care who was sleeping with whose husband when it was mine." Her jaw moved. That's not an answer. "No. Did you sleep with him?" There it was, sitting on the table between us, and the honest answer was 1 syllable long, and it was no, and it had been no for 11 months, and saying it would have cost me nothing except the entire thing. I have thought about this a great deal since, and I'm not going to dress it up for you. I could have told her the truth. I chose not to. "Answer me," she said. I looked at her for a second. Then I picked up my bag. "Ask him. I put money on the bar for a drink I hadn't ordered, and I left her sitting there with a man she'd already decided was lying to her, and a question she was going to ask him that night, and no possible answer that would help. 2 words. That's all I gave her. She built the rest herself, and she used good materials because they were hers. She asked him that night. He told me about it 4 days later, sitting in his own kitchen with his hands around a cup he wasn't drinking from, and he told it badly, out of order, which is how you can tell somebody isn't performing. She'd asked him whether he'd slept with me. He'd said no, and she had stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and said, "You're going to say that with a straight face to me," and gone upstairs. He was quiet for a while after he finished. Then he said, "She thinks I've been lying to her for a year. I know. I haven't. I know." And he looked up at me across that table, and he did not say, "This is your fault," and he did not say anything at all. And that was the first time in 11 months that Desmond Ainsley looked at me like a person he was deciding something about. The 28th of June would have been 10 years. I didn't mark it. I noticed it the way you notice a stare that isn't there anymore. We were at his table with the calendar on the wall and the 17th circled, and I was talking through the sequence, who gets what package, in what order, on which day, and I said something about the restaurant, that we should do it again in July, that it was working. He put the page down. "I'll help you finish this," he said, "but I'm not going to be another person you use to hurt them." I opened my mouth to tell him that wasn't what this was, and I couldn't, because I'd said it out loud in a coffee shop in October, in a sentence I'd practiced in my car. "I don't need you to like me. I just need them to believe we compare notes." I'd put a man on a table like a piece of paper, and I'd been so proud of how cleanly I did it. And I'd been doing it for 11 months to a person who was going through the exact same thing I was, and who had never once asked me for anything. I'd been erased in front of 19 people at a table under a tent, and I had spent a year building the most careful case of my life, and somewhere in it I had started doing the one thing I could not forgive. And he'd known. He'd known in June, and he'd known in the 3 seconds before he said, "All right," and he'd gone to the restaurant anyway because I needed him to. I said, "Okay." It was 1 word, and it was the truest thing I said that entire year. I sent Tobias Renfrew 1 page on the 7th of August. Not a threat, not a letter. A single photocopy of the vendor onboarding approval from November of 2024, with his own name and his own credentials stamped at the bottom, and 1 line typed underneath it. Filing first is different. That's all. No signature, no return address he didn't already have from the postmark. I'd like to tell you I did it out of pure decency. It wasn't pure. A man who self-reports is a witness, and a man who gets caught is a defendant, and witnesses are more useful. But it was also the other thing, and both were true at once, and I've stopped trying to separate them. He never answered. On the 18th of August, at my own kitchen table, I assembled it. 2 packages, identical, the timeline, Pruitt's numbered log and his sworn declaration, the notary journal entry, the Boise documentation, the certificate of amendment, the corporate records, the Harrow Line contract, the onboarding approval, the vendor threshold policy, the HR query logs with their timestamps and their wrong purpose codes. And I numbered every page. I did it by hand with a machine a woman gave me in 2016 because she thought I'd be back, and the crank on it is stiff, and the ink smells like a building I haven't been inside in 9 years. And it took me most of the night. The last page with my husband's signature on it came out as Exhibit 6. There was 1 more thing on the table when I started, and it was not in either package when I finished. I put the plastic bag with the collar in it back in the drawer. She signed it on the 17th. I know exactly what it looks like because I have seen it since. It's one page. There's a box, and above the box it says, "List all entities in which you or an immediate family member hold a direct or indirect interest that is transacted with the company in the reporting period." She wrote one word in it, none, in her own hand in a conference room, on a Monday, in the middle of a week, when the only thing on her mind was whether her husband was lying to her. On Wednesday the 19th, 2 packages were delivered by courier with signature required. One to the buyer's counsel at the firm on the napkin, one to the chair of Northmark Health's audit committee at his office personally. Neither one went to Human Resources. Human Resources reported up through her. On Thursday the 20th of August at 11 in the morning, Caroline Ainsley was placed on administrative leave pending review, and her credentials were suspended while she was still in the building. At 2, my husband was asked to step out of a meeting. By dinner, everyone knew, 48 hours. That was the entire thing. 48 hours between the words she wrote and the day somebody could prove it wasn't true. She came back 4 days later, and she came back the only way she had left. Her counsel's position was that Ainsley Ridge Holdings was a jointly held family company, that both members had participated in its governance, and that any transaction it entered had been entered with the knowledge and consent of both. Her husband knew. His name was on the amendment. His signature was on the document that put Harrow Line under the family entity, and the notary's book said he had stood there and signed it, and a notary's book is a hard thing to argue with unless you can show why a woman would need to forge her own husband's name. And the only page in the world that showed why, the page that proved she had needed to keep one specific person from reading one specific thing, was in a minute book in a basement on Riverside, squared to a clip, exactly where I had put it back. I had been so careful to be a decent person that I had built her a door. Junie was in the hallway outside the conference room on the 26th because there was nowhere else for her to be. 13 years old, backpack, phone she wasn't looking at, sitting on the bench people sit on when a school calls. The door was not shut properly. I don't know if anybody noticed that. I have thought about it since, and I don't believe she heard the specifics. I think she heard her father's name and a tone. She stood up. She came into that room with her backpack still on, and 4 adults stopped talking, and she walked around the table and put a folded piece of paper down in front of her father's attorney. And she said, "That's the one with my name on it. It's in Mom's blue book on the shelf in the study." She had photographed it herself. In April, the same month it was dated, because she'd found a book on a shelf with her own name inside it, and she'd been 13 for 2 months, and she had done what a kid does, which is take a picture of a thing that doesn't make sense. She kept it for 4 months. She had known, standing in that hallway, what it was worth and who it belonged to, and she is smart enough that she also knew what it cost. That paper was a trust with a college in it. She put it on the table anyway because they were saying it was her father. Nobody spoke for a second. Then she said, "Can I wait outside?" And it wasn't a question, and she went and sat back down on the bench. Caroline came to the house the following Thursday. I wasn't there. I heard this from a girl who told it to me a long time afterward, at a kitchen counter, and she told it flatly, the way you tell something you've finished with. Her mother stood on the step and said that she was sorry about all of it, and that things were going to settle, and that next Thursday she'd come by and they'd go to dinner, just the 2 of them. She promised. And Junie said, "You don't have to come Thursday. I stopped saving Thursdays." Then she shut the door, and neither of them said anything else, and her mother stood on the step for a minute and then went to her car. The audit committee issued its findings on the 4th of September. I've read it more times than is healthy. It's 11 pages, and it is the least dramatic document imaginable, which is what makes it the most. It names Caroline Ainsley. It does not name Desmond. There is a paragraph in it that concludes the member signature on the September 2024 amendment could not be attributed to him, and that he had no knowledge of the entity's activity. And that paragraph took a 13-year-old with a phone in April. My husband resigned for cause on the 11th. There's no severance in for cause. The equity conversion unwound under the representation clause because he had signed a certification of his own and because a signature is a thing you are responsible for. He had spent 2 years trading that signature for a chair. Desmond brought the report over that evening and put it in front of me and turned it to the last page, where they list the materials received and who submitted them. He put his finger under one line, submitted by M. Coyle, CEDS, records, filing, that kind of thing. The 8th of October was a Thursday, too, though I didn't plan that one. 2 dissolutions of marriage entered in the same courthouse on the same morning, and afterward, a hallway with a bank of elevators and too many people in it. She was already there when I came out, and she said, pleasantly, the way she said everything, that Grant used to complain there was nothing to talk about at home, that she'd never understood how he stood it. So I leaned in, and I said, I slept with your husband. It was August. It was after everything. It was 2 people at a kitchen table at 1 in the morning who had run out of paper, and it was nobody's plan, least of all mine. And then I said the 6 words. He sets his alarm for 5:40. Her face didn't move yet. He turns it off before it rings, so it won't wake me. That's all of it. That's the whole thing. There is no lie in it. There is no accusation in it. There is nothing in it to argue with, and nothing to deny, and nothing anybody could ever make me take back. Just a small domestic fact about a man's morning, of the kind you only know if you have been in the room and she had been in that room for 14 years. I walked to the elevator. I have replayed it many times, and I'm not going to tell you I regret it, because I'd be lying and I've come too far in this story to start. I told him that night. I told him exactly what I'd said, because he had the right to know he'd been used one more time, and I was not going to be a person who didn't say it. He was quiet for a long while. Then he said, "Was it true?" I said yes, and he said, "Then that's the first thing you've ever done to her that you didn't plan." 2 years, to the day, since the first time I sat across from him in a coffee shop with a glass front and asked for a key. Grant is in Boise. He does consulting, which is the word for what a man does when nobody in the industry will put him on a payroll. For cause follows you. He has one person left who could write him a reference, and it's the woman he left me for, and he has not asked her, because asking would mean admitting what she is now. Caroline repaid 3 years of incentive compensation under the clawback. She lost the equity, the largest position of her life, in a deal that closed in November without her. She kept her license to practice nothing in particular. She has Junie every other weekend. Verity Sloan sat on the other side of the table she used to arrange and was asked to read her own query log out loud with the timestamps and the purpose codes she'd chosen from a drop-down. She still works there. Nobody tells her anything anymore. Tobias Renfrew never filed first. He's in the same seat, with the same title, and he'll be in it for years. And every time a roll opens, the file gets pulled and somebody remembers. Desmond dissolved Ainsley Ridge. It was the only way to get his name off it. 11 years of a company he built wound up in 4 months of filings, and he did most of the paperwork himself at that kitchen table. Junie starts high school next fall. The trust is gone. There's a different plan now, smaller, in her father's name. And she knows exactly what happened to the first one because nobody in that house lies to her about anything anymore. She wants to do forensic accounting. She told me that at a counter without looking up, and I said that was a real job, and she said, I know it is, in the voice 13-year-olds use. And she was 14 by then. She calls me Myra. She has never once mentioned the paper she put on that table, and I have never asked. There are still evenings in that house that are very quiet. But when I come over now, the door at the top of the stairs is open about 2 inches. It was shut for a long time. It is not shut anymore. For a kid who put her own mother on a table, 2 inches is a great deal. I threw out the plastic bag with the collar in it in October when I moved. It wasn't a moment. I found it behind a box of staples and looked at it and put it in the trash with everything else in that drawer. And I want you to know that the single most useless piece of evidence I ever collected is the one I kept the longest. And I think I know why. It was the last thing I had from a year when I still thought the problem was another woman. He asked me once at the beginning what I did. I said records. 9 years of a smaller and smaller version of that answer, and a table full of people making a warm noise about it, and a man who loved me for a while, and then found me boring, and then found me expensive. And here is the thing I did not expect, and the reason I'm telling you all of it. I got everything I planned for, every single piece. The findings came out on the day I chose, to the desks I chose, 48 hours after a woman wrote one word in a box. I have never once been sorry about that, and I don't intend to start. But that isn't what fixed it. What fixed it was a man at a kitchen table in June, putting a page down and telling me he wasn't going to let me use him. The only person in 9 years who looked at me long enough to see that I was capable of doing damage. Everybody else had decided I was furniture. He was the first one who noticed I was a person, and the way he told me was by drawing a line. I didn't need to be adored. I'd had that. It's cheap. I needed to be seen, and it turns out that being seen is not always a compliment. Sometimes it's somebody telling you no. So that's my question for you, and then I'll let you go. Not who hurt you. That's the easy one, and you already know the answer. Here it is. Who in your life is completely certain that you'll always be there? Because both of them were sure. Grant was sure of me, and Caroline was sure of him. And the thing that finally took them apart wasn't a document, and it wasn't a courtroom. It was finding out that the people they'd counted on to stay were doing fine without them. I'd really like to hear it. Tell me in the comments. I read them, all of them, and there are more of us than you'd think. If you stayed all the way to the end of this one, thank you, genuinely. It's a long story, and I told it in order, including the parts I don't come out of well. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.